Hello everybody. Hasbro have been knocking out Marvel Legends figures thick and fast, and it seems like all of them are ones that I want. So I'm with you again with another Marvel Legends review, and this is another deluxe action figure because it is Ghost Rider, and this time it's Danny Ketch Ghost Rider, or the Ghost Rider of the 1990s. My personal favourite, this is the one I grew up with, so you know I was going to be picking this guy up. And I'm just going to dive straight in with my review on this one by looking at the packaging. Now, this is slightly different packaging to what we typically get from Marvel Legends these days. It's elongated, it's a little bit thicker and wider. We have had motorcycles in the past, in fact we've had other Ghost Riders like this before in the past, but it's been quite a few years and the branding has definitely changed. So for starters, it's probably worth pointing out that this is a straight oblong with straight lines, there's no curves or dents or anything like that, and it is a window display, so we can see the figure and the cycle on display there, which is great through the plastic window. And then we have some black borders, which is, fairly nondescript. I'm not a big fan of this approach, to be honest. At the bottom of the packaging, we see something that's resembling, I suppose, the motorcycle dashboard, which is kind of cool, and it's adding a splash of colour, which I think this really needs. So this is mostly about the window display. It's quite displayable in its own right. It looks good on the shelf, but it's not the most exciting packaging I've ever seen. Things do take a massive upswing, though, when we look at the reverse of the packaging. Here we see a little bit of bio on the right hand side about the character, and then we have some really nice photos taken of the cycle, some of the details, and of course the figure in a great display here. This looks really good, and this is much more displayable. And then if we look at the side panel, we have this fantastic artwork, which I believe is provided by the artist Mark Texeira, one of my all-time favourite Ghost Rider artists. I think it's absolutely phenomenal. I love this paintwork, and I think this is such a striking image. It's just a shame that this is such a small image in the scheme of things, because it's such a narrow panel. I would have loved to have seen this writ large on the front of the packaging, or perhaps on the back. But nevertheless, this is a really nice touch, and I'm glad they included it here. So, if we start off by taking a look at the Ghost Rider figure himself, I've got to admit I've got some slightly mixed feelings about this figure overall. But let's start off by taking a look at this head sculpt, which I think is really nicely done. There's some really nice paint apps going on here. There's a lot of detail. I particularly like how he's got the translucent flame head at the back there. I think that works really very nicely. And we can see a lot of shading around the skull there, particularly over the eyes and around the nose. Looks really, really good. But also, the one thing I do really like is that they actually have bothered to give him a little bit of detailing in the eye socket so that we can actually see the effect of that penance stare, which I think is a really cool touch, and I don't know if I've seen that before, so I think it works really well here anyway. Now, it wasn't too long ago that we had a previous single carded release of the Ghost Rider. Now, this was the Johnny Blaze version of the character. It wasn't meant to be the 90s Danny Ketch version, which is why ultimately I passed on it, although I did love that retro card art. Yes, I love that stuff big time. Maybe we'll get some others further down the road. However, we can see that they have recycled the head sculpt here. This looks to be pretty much the same, although I do feel that this is superior in terms of the paint apps. We're getting a lot more depth and texturing on that skull there. Those washes are really enhancing this and bringing this to life. So I think this is a significant step up on that previous release, and of course the body is slightly different sculpt anyway. It'd be remiss of me not to mention that that previous release was kind of based on a previous deluxe version, very similar to this one, where he came with a motorcycle, which was of course a classic Johnny Blaze Ghost Rider. I actually have this. It was a fantastic vehicle, and I think they did a pretty great job overall. Now, it would be remiss of me not to point to the fact that we've had another Ghost Rider in the Marvel Legends line, a specifically Danny Ketch version of Ghost Rider, and this was from ToyBiz many years ago. In fact, I think this was Series 3, so that would have put it around about 2002, 2003, something like that. So yeah, it's been a while since we had a Danny Ketch Ghost Rider. Now, I have to say, things have obviously changed, the world has moved on, advances in technology, etc., but I've always loved this ToyBiz figure, and it's difficult for me to say which one I actually think is better. In some ways, I actually do prefer that original release, and we'll get into some of those reasons a little bit later on, but I did want to point out that there has been one release already, and if you want to know a little bit more about that particular figure, I did cover it in one of my top 10 videos, which I'll link to at the end of this video. Okay, so if we look at the body, I believe this is a brand new sculpt. They haven't just recycled the previous Johnny Blaze version. It's a very different jacket that we're getting here, and I don't recall seeing this in any other figures. I may be wrong on that. I don't own every Marvel Legends figure out there, but I don't recall seeing this exact cut previously. So it's really good that we've got something new here. It's nice that we had the spikes on the shoulders, the extra pieces around the belt, and of course on the gauntlets as well, which we'll see a little bit closer in a moment. And yet it feels a little bit bland, and that's because we haven't got any washers running through it, which is a real shame. Likewise, if we look at that chain there, you know, it's a nice piece. A little bit of depth and texturing is all we need. A little bit of a wash over that will just draw out those details and make it look a lot more effective. As it is, it just feels a bit toyetic, a little bit plastic and a bit cheap, and it's such a shame because I think the sculpting is really, really nice and it lets this figure down. And we can see it again on the gauntlets here, and likewise on the boots and some of the chain details that's there. And it's a shame because if we look at the boots, for example, we can see there is like a leather effect going on, which is really cool. Just a slight wash over that would bring that to life and just really elevate this figure so much higher. And such a shame, especially for a deluxe release, that they couldn't have put that little bit of extra effort in. Okay, so if we look at the articulation, he does have a ball joint at the top of the neck, so he can spin his head from side to side, but there's a little bit of resistance. It won't go all the way because of some of the flame effects in the neck there, which is disappointing. What is very cool though is he actually has a hinge in the jaw, which was unexpected, so it's really cool that that moves up and down. His head kind of wobbles forwards and backwards, but I wouldn't say there's a great range of motion here, unfortunately. Now he does have ball joints in the shoulders, and of course there is a complementary bicep swivel, which is great. He's got a double joint at the elbow, so that hand will go all the way back to the head there, which is fantastic. And he's got the standard pin swivel at the wrist there, so that hand will rotate all the way around and it will hinge forwards and backwards for the most part. Now he's got a straight swivel at the waist, and he's got the standard ab crunch in the abdominal area. Shame we didn't have the ball joints here, but okay. Now we've got ball joints in the hips though, so the legs will kick out to the side. There is the standard thigh swivel at the top there. The legs will kick forwards, they'll go backwards a little bit, and there is a double joint at the knee, so that lower leg will kick all the way back there. There's also a swivel at the boot cut, as you would hope, which is great, and then he has an ankle rocker as well, allowing that foot to hinge forwards and backwards and pivot from side to side. In terms of accessories, he has an additional pair of hands, one closed fist and one open hand, and this flaming chain effect, which isn't original. We've had this a few times before now, but it is a very nice piece. So all in all, this is a pretty decent figure. If I was going to be rating the figure, I'd probably just give it 3 stars. You know, it's got some really nice features. I really love the head sculpt. I really love the paint apps on the head. I think the accessories are kind of fun, but some of the articulation lets this down, and definitely the lack of paint apps really hurt this figure. But of course, this is not a single carded figure. It comes with his cycle, which is absolutely fantastic. This is an iconic design in my opinion. I would say that I grew up reading this comic, but I still think this is a really cool cycle and individual and unique. It's not something we see anywhere else, and I think they've done a really nice job with the sculpting on this. It looks spot on in terms of proportions and looks to be pretty accurate to what we'd expect to see on page. Now there is some little details in this. I particularly like in the sort of the not a windscreen, but that shield on the front on the front of the bike there. We can see some indentations and marks, like it's seen a bit of battle. Again, why didn't we have a bit of a wash running through this just to bring that to life? We could just paint them silver. That would just make it look, you know, much more realistic and just give it that depth and texture. As it is, it just feels a little bit bland, so what a shame. But, you know, there's some nice details in here, especially when it comes to the tyres, which I think they've done a really nice job. They have recycled the previous Ghost Rider tyres, which are sort of a translucent rubber, which is really cool. Two-toned, we've got orange and yellow in there, which I think is really effective. But this time we get some unique fire pieces that are more of a solid plastic that they can rest on to allow this cycle to stand up. Without it, this cycle's going to fall over. You need to steady it in at least one of these to hold it in place. But I think they work really well. They sort of slot in seamlessly and they look pretty consistent, and I think, you know, it looks boss. Actually, this is a really cool design. There are some other little cool details as well, including the silver petrol cap, which I think is a really nice bit of attention to detail there. We have the brown leather seat as well. Again, no wash over this, so it does look a little bit cheap and a bit plastic-like, but you know, you could probably fix this yourself, I guess. But it is quite nice when we look at the handlebars. We can actually see the speedometer. There's lots of detail in there, which is really cool. And of course, we have the Midnight Suns medallion, which was so key to those comic books. Really cool to see that. Of course, that's where Ghost Rider places his hand and initially made the transformation into Ghost Rider. Looks absolutely fantastic. A lot of detail there, which is great, and we've got the colours that are accurate. looks really nice. And if we look under the bonnet, as it were, we can see a lot of detail actually under here as well, which is pretty cool because I don't think there'd be an expectation to actually look underneath the cycle. But you can see there's a lot of detail here, which is really nice. And again, it's pretty much page accurate as well. So, top marks for that. Interestingly, the pedal bar can actually be removed and put into either two slots, either at the front or the rear of the cycle, so you can, I suppose, position his feet in either position. I don't know how particularly useful that is, to be honest. I don't think it really impacts anything either way, so I think it just comes down to an aesthetic choice. However, he does come with this very cool extra flame piece, which slots into the base of the cycle, and it holds the cycle up into like a rearing position. This is fantastic. I absolutely love this piece, and it transforms what you can do with this as a display piece. This just looks absolutely phenomenal, and for me just pushes this over the top. I love this, so much so that I'll be giving this an extra star because of this feature, because it just changes what you can do with this figure in terms of your display. It just looks so cool, and I've not seen anything like this before. It's such a little thing, but what a big difference it makes. Now, before we wrap up, I really should comment about how he sits on the cycle and what this all looks like together. So he fits easily enough onto the seat, and he can grip both the handlebars, which is great. Of course, he has the option to put his feet either at the front or the back of the vehicle there and rest his feet on the pedal. But I have to be honest, it doesn't quite work, as is so often the case with characters on motorcycles. The figures often struggle to look convincing from all angles, so you can definitely put this in certain positions where it looks absolutely fantastic, but if you look at it closely, you can see he doesn't always quite manage to sit his bum into the seat, which looks a little bit weird, and there can be a little bit of a disconnect sometimes between his feet and the pedal, his bum on the seat. Whether you want him gripping the handlebars, he can look a little bit stiff and a little bit too far back. It can look a bit awkward and a bit clunky, so I think you're going to have to spend a little bit of time getting this into the position that you want, that looks right for you in terms of your display. So after all that, then how do I feel about this figure? Well, for me, I'm happy to give it 4 stars, and without that extra piece that I mentioned before, that where it could lift up and rear up, I probably would have given it 3, but I think this has definitely pushed it over the edge in terms of what you can do as a display feature, and that just makes all the difference, as I mentioned before. So for me, I'm actually really happy with this. This is a much loved character, and I'm really glad to finally have an updated version of Danny Ketch's Ghost Rider in my Marvel Legends collection. It's difficult for me to really assess and say which version I prefer, whether ToyBiz or Hasbro's. I think they both have pros and cons. There's a lot more detail and texturing and depth and all of that stuff on the ToyBiz version. It even had a metal chain, which was really very cool. However, the cycle here, definitely no two ways about it, this is vastly superior, and makes it a much more interesting display piece. I still have much love for the original ToyBiz version, but this is a really nice contender too. As I said, they've both got strengths and weaknesses, I suppose, but this is a really strong figure. I think if you're a fan of Ghost Rider, and in particular the Danny Ketch version, then you're going to love this. I can't see any reason to dissuade you from picking it up. I think it's a really solid release, and a really fun one, and I think it's going to make a fantastic display in your collection. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please do consider giving the video a like. That kind of thing really does help the channel out, and it allows me to keep making more content. And if you're interested in seeing more content, remember to hit subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos coming soon.